so much to investigate here for coming into 2025. And so let's start as people join. Let's start with introductions. I'm Gary Whitgriff. I recently joined the board of the North American Millets Alliance. And thank you, Don and Joni, and of course, Jonathan, for inviting me in on this. Joni, I'll let you probably start with the introductions, but you were a founding member of the North American Millets Alliance. So you want to just give a brief update of your situation?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I'm Joni, and Don had contacted me, I believe in 2022, early 2022, with an idea that he and Dr. Landeck had about forming an advocacy group, an education group that is now called North American Millets Alliance. So I was very thrilled to join, as I had been working since 2015 to build market awareness for proso millet, sorghum, and other millets, and was really up against a lot of the same issues that they had identified, where we had and I'm sorry, my dog is coming down the stairs and quite loud. We had some issues with nomenclature and some issues with value chain development and market development that millets were facing that was preventing them from becoming a widely consumed crop in North America, is something I'm still very passionate about solving today. So I'm involved with Snacktivist Foods, which is a food innovation company, also CIVC, which is collaborative integrated value chain, and we have a millet deholing facility in Montana, organic and conventional. And I'm really active in bringing the market together. So thank you, Gary and Don and Greg. I work with all of you, and it's quite a pleasure. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Joni. And let's, rather than going into questions for you, Joni, I'm going to start with you. But Craig, could you give us a little background on yourself and Dryland Genetics?
Sure. So I'm Craig Anderson. I grew up as a farm kid in southern Minnesota, and got a degree in agriculture, business, and economics. And been working in the seed industry for the last 36 years. Currently, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Dryland Genetics, and we are a proso millet breeding company. And to my knowledge, I think we're about the only private proso millet breeding company that exists. So I've been doing that since October of 2021, and have really enjoyed the transition from corn and soybean into something very unique and different, and excited to be a part of the conversation today for sure.
Good. Thank you, Craig. I just wrote down another question I'm going to ask you. So you always, every time I visit with you, you bring up things that make me curious. And so this is going to be a little bit of sidebar conversation. But Joni, why don't we go ahead and start with you? What are the biggest barriers to proso millet product innovation in the U.S. or North America?
Yeah, there's still some significant barriers to developing markets for proso millet that we're facing. One of them has historically been just more regionally diversified deholing and processing, because there weren't very many processors in the United States. And that has always been one of the barriers that many of the regions and the regional farmers who want to grow proso millet have been up against. But really on the market side, we even though we've had the UN Year of Millets, there was some fantastic global education that was done and achieved during that year. We still have not earned that spot in the consumers or in the influencers, like that being buyers at influential retailers, chefs in the food service realm. We just haven't earned that place for innovation yet on the plate. And so that's something that millet, particularly proso millet, still needs to work on, is some actual culinary inspiration so that we can inspire people to try proso millet. And in the case of people like retailers, we need them to say, oh yeah, we want to have proso millet containing foods on our shelves, because this is an important commitment to both human health and to soil health and agronomic considerations too, like climate resilient agriculture. So we have a little development work that needs to be done still. There has been very little marketing money invested into helping us promote the benefits of proso millet. I'm hoping that this year on the NAMA side, we can work on that. And also we need our private sector players and institutional philanthropy players to help us get the word out too.
Well, I think you bring up a key point, and before I go to the second question, part of it is just public awareness. And what are, I mean, you have your food company, but what are you doing specifically to through your company to bring the public even aware that they should be using millets?
You know, we've struggled with that for a decade, really trying to get the value proposition for millets out into the forefront.
Mhm.
We've trialed a lot of different approaches, you know, like influencer campaigns, working with chefs and going to culinary festivals. We're still really grappling with that. So a couple of years ago, I decided to step back and stop doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for different results. And we're developing like an impact metric that can go on consumer packaged goods or on menus. So like if you're in a food service setting, you could have a QR code. And that way we can communicate the value proposition right there at the point of consumption. So like a consumer can scan a package of just, let's say, for example, plain proso millet in a grocery store next to a bag of rice.
Yeah.
That way they could say, learn why proso millet has benefits that are important to you. And from there, they can start to explore nutrient density information or medicinal properties that we don't know a lot about. They're not really proven yet, but there's some interesting research going on in the realm of millets as a group, as far as like functional food properties, gut health properties, all these cool things, blood sugar tolerance, diabetes tolerance. And that's, I think, where we're going to have to drive those curious customers. They're a small segment. They're not like the norm, but there is a small segment out there that wants to take the learning a little bit deeper. And if we can get
sure.
some, you know, influential folks like chefs behind it, you know, that having them have access to like, oh, here's why you should be excited about millet. Like it tastes great. It's easy to cook. It's very quick cooking. But, you know, there's this host of other cool things, and here's some ideas. That's really where I feel like we have a massive gap.
Well,
And yeah, we
yes,
can fix that.
yeah, I 100% agree that education is part of it, and I wasn't aware of your scanning thing. I think that's fantastic. But the second question I have down here is, what is new in the proso millet processing value added chain? How is that developing? How are you working to develop that in your company?
Yeah, so Snacktivist is actually a collaborator in a really cool project that was funded by USDA. There's another company led by Colleen Kavanaugh. It's called CIVC, Collaborative Integrated Value Chain. And that was a $3 million OMDG grant, so Organic Markets Development, to help grow value chain capacity and markets for proso millet containing foods and also high protein hulless oats. Two really important, great dry season crops that can help be, you know, provide rescue crops. You know, proso millet in some of our regions is a really valuable rescue crop. If your spring crop doesn't move forward, it's
Absolutely.
a short season that can be planted. It also in our region is agronomically important because of the summer fallow that we're trying to actually get away from. And so this grant recognized that that was valuable and that we needed processing infrastructure. And so we will be dehulling proso millet and processing it in that facility in Belgrade, Montana, which is right outside of Bozeman. And we should be doing that by late spring, early summer. So we'll be looking for high quality customers, both on the branded side, food service ingredients, to really help get this proso millet out into the market. And importantly, we're going to be working really hard on germplasm. So people like Craig and Dryland Genetics are really important there, because we don't want just any old proso millet. We really want to think about working with our farmers as partners and our seed developers as partners, so that we're growing not only just millet, but we're growing the best millet, the best culinary profile, best processing profile, best agricultural profile. And we really want to make sure that it's got the flavor and nutrition. That's what's going to drive consumer adoption. So it's
Absolutely.
a longer
Absolutely.
process. You don't do this just overnight, but having this great relationship and the USDA funding at CIVC is going to open up a lot of doors that weren't previously open to us for that kind of nuanced innovation.
We're going to bring Craig in here shortly, but you're absolutely right. Just because a variety yields good doesn't necessarily make that
Right.
the best for cooking or for flour, and it could be different.
Correct.
Maltsters, for example, I've been working with one and trying to make sure that the quality is there, not only from a processing standpoint, but very concerned about germination, making sure that it germs right, it doesn't bring in disease, how the farmer should be handling it, things like that. And so it's different if it's just going to poultry feed or an ethanol plant or bird food. We're talking specific product uses, and by refining that, I think it's really, really important. And so before I jump to Craig, where do you think the market is heading for the 2025? You mentioned that you're going to be using some 24 millets into your initial process here. And so are you contracting for 25, or you have specific growers you're working with?
Right now we do have a pool of growers, and we're also growing that farmer network so that we are looking at, not only just distance to the processing facility, but the quality of the farmer we're working with. Like, what kind of commitment to soil health, what kind of commitment to inputs management, not just in our organic farmers, which there's more consistency around that, but with our regenerative farmers that are coming from more of that conventional angle, but they've already achieved a lot of these benchmarks of significant synthetics dependency, things like that. Like, they're really doing incredible work. So we are actively onboarding people. So if you're a farmer and you're interested in learning more, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, because I can send you the intake form. Because we're brand new and we're launching the sales side and the value chain side simultaneously. Our offtakes are small this year. Like, we're really kind of just getting started, and there is actually a decent amount of millet still in bin from last year. If you're in the industry, most people know that last year was kind of a soft year, so many farmers decided to hold on to their proso millet if they had storage. So this year is interesting because we're building the plane mid-flight, but I think going into 2026 especially, we'll be really positioned to create some great offtakes. We'll have better understanding of seed selection. We're going to do some smaller kind of variety trials this year with some of the farmers we work with, so we can hone in on that flavor profile. We want a proso millet that doesn't have that bitterness quality. Sometimes that's at the stake of certain functional food value, but people don't like bitterness. And we're also selecting for a proso millet that's grown in soils that has a really low heavy metal residue or a heavy metal concentration, because we will be testing for heavy metals for some of the product lines that we'll be launching. And so we're looking for, really clean, desiccant free, testing for over 500 agricultural chemicals, residues, and also heavy metals. So this is like a very kind of scientifically driven market development project. And it's very exciting because the team behind it is super sophisticated and motivated.
Well, I think you barely touched on one thing that I believe that the market is not aware of, is how well proso millet stores when it's put in the bin at say 10 to 12% moisture. It'll store for decades. And in fact, they've found millet in tombs, 1,000 years old that obviously didn't germinate. But the point is, with that hull, it remains intact and is basically blocking out not only insects, but fungi and things like that. And so your new facility is going to be taking the hull off immediately before it goes into the food chain. So that's excellent. So let's break here and move into Craig. I'm going to ask you the same question to start yours. Where's the market heading for proso millet in 25?
Yeah, so USDA just released their 2024 numbers for harvest and yield, which came in about as the industry expected. And generally what that's led to is that we've got an adequate supply to meet current domestic demands and the export demand that does exist. So looking at that, we really see that there's pressure against commodity price for farmers to really grow the number of acres that'll be planted. But at the same time, we've got a couple things that are developing, and that hopefully we'll get into the discussion today that I think can continue to evolve that. But right now, it looks a little bit like 2025 will be similar to what we saw in 2024.
You could be right. I looked at the acres and there was some carryover, but what we don't get on proso millet from USDA is the stocks. And so until we see what is moving out of the chain, we really don't know. And so I'll be working with that down the road here, Craig. But go ahead and let's discuss the possibilities of proso millet in your modern breeding techniques that Dryland Genetics is using.
Sure, and it was interesting because I think both Joni and you, Gary, touched on something at the very beginning of this conversation, that there's really the element of breeding varieties that are better for the farmers who are growing those varieties as a commodity grain, and the benefit of breeding those varieties for what they will be used for in the end use market. Two very distinct efforts, and one of the kind of the exciting things about where Dryland Genetics is at, when the company was founded, we actually started with as many diverse germplasm pools as could be sourced, and so I think we had somewhere just over 700 different germplasm pools of white proso millet that got pulled together and brought together to start our program from all over the world. And what that's leading to right now is some of the interesting and kind of exciting innovations that are coming out of the program a decade later. So this work started in 2014. Of course, key to any seed company model with a breeding program, you're focused on yield and agronomics for the farmers who are considering the varieties. So that first and foremost has never really been lost as a focus. But really, one of the other things that is coming out of the effort so far is just the idea of how do you benefit a farmer who's considering, keeping proso millet in the rotation and really making it part of their stable plan year in and year out. And that's actually helping them with the idea of direct cut or straight cut harvest.
Absolutely.
So instead of having to windrow the millet and then pick it up later, or even the people who are straight cutting today are having to leave so much time for maturity of the entire crop that they have shattering. And so the breeding program has been working on uniform maturation along with shatter resistance, and we're actually starting to see some real progress towards some varieties that would be intentionally developed and released to do straight cutting with. We anticipate that there could be as much as 20 to 25% yield loss for farmers between the process of shatter and field loss during harvest with the current environment.
I tell you what, I helped my grandson harvest and run the combine, and he has somebody swath it for him because they don't have a swather. And it is not only a time consuming, but also an expense that you don't have when you straight cut. And whether it's 20 or 25%, you may be underestimating in some cases because it depends on how long it's had to lay in the windrow, and then the equipment that picks it up, the combine header that picks it up. And so uniform maturity is key. I'm glad you're working on that. That is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and so that's what I would call a central focus and theme of our breeding efforts. But then that kind of the more interesting thing that's being developed over time is just all of the opportunity that's coming from the diversity of the germplasm pool. So things like waxy was an original target, and waxy is not that unique. But the reason we're excited about it is it could really benefit the food and fuel market for proso millet.
Absolutely.
It brings some qualities into play that I think would be really beneficial and helpful for both of those markets. We can talk a little bit more about the fuel market later, but another thing that's come out of the program is an easy dehulling set of germplasm. And so this is, germplasm proso millet that traditionally would require some pretty intensive equipment and mechanization to go through the dehulling process. We've got some lines that are actually very, very easy to dehull with some gentle manipulation of the seed itself. What it does is it ends up saving an extreme amount of the endosperm that's lost during the traditional dehulling process, which will actually benefit the food people and the end users on that side. We've got some things that are just looking at large seeded varieties. So one of the issues with proso millet along the use chain is that small size can kind of make it sometimes difficult to work with in applications. And so we're looking at some proso millet lines that would give us seed sizes equal to like what grain sorghum would be.
Huge. That's
And
huge.
so,
That's huge seeds there. Grain sorghum can range from what, 7.5, maybe even heard of 5,000 seeds per pound to 12,000 seeds per pound, and proso millet is 80,000 seeds per
80,
pound.
yeah.
So, yeah.
But for sure, we've looked at things that are now getting us into that, 20, 25,000 and just significantly visually larger seeded millet.
Well, you're looking
And so
at something that moving into the food market
Yeah.
is one thing, but you address the agronomics, you can't have that shattering either. So it's not easy trying to meet one goal and then, for example, losing it just from wind damage before you even get a chance to combine it. So yeah, that's juggling some interesting tiny seeds there.
And probably one of the more exciting things for our future would be just recently we've actually discovered that we've got some millet germplasm that has a very different nutritional profile than traditional millet. And so we're actually doing some work now to really quantify and clarify where that's coming from. But it's repeatable as we do the trials, which is one of the first steps or tests we looked at. And now the next thing is to see if we can understand what part of the genomic sequence is driving that nutritional profile. But clearly it would lead to the creation of what I would call nutritionally enhanced varieties in the future. So, with what we're doing on agronomics and yield and just benefit to the grower for how the varieties, are lodging tolerant, how they're shatter resistant and some of those things, through to, better, more specifically designed varieties for end use markets. The breeding program is very robust and we're pretty excited about it because that is the focus of Dryland Genetics is the breeding program.
Well, your name of your company, Dryland Genetics, means that you're seed focused, but beyond seed, what other than new varieties, what is Dryland Genetics working on as far as you can produce all kinds of seed, but unless somebody's growing it for a market, you're wasting your time. So what are some of the things Dryland Genetics are working on the marketing end?
Great question. And it kind of ties to what Joni had mentioned, that in general, millets need some support and just some people that are actually promoting the really neat benefits of millets. And we noticed that was absent for sure in the proso millet space. And so other than just our breeding effort, we are really working to enhance the image and value of the millet industry. And so there's a couple specific things we're doing. One of those that I'm actually pretty excited about is we have demonstrated that proso millet can produce ethanol equal to number 2 yellow corn in the process that's generally used today. And so we believe that, if we can get a very water efficient grain to kind of supplement or backfill what's traditionally been a corn, ethanol market in areas that probably don't benefit from growing dryland corn as much as they could from growing millet, that we think that there could be value for the grower and value for the actual industry. So we're working hard now on actually getting the pathways cleared for millet to be, and actually recognized grain by the USDA, the Treasury, the EPA. And so it's a pretty complex process, but we're definitely following that intensely and supporting it directly. I think the other areas that we're looking at is using millet just as a more substantial source in like poultry feeds. And so we've had 4 tests that have been done at the University of Nebraska.
Just in poultry, eggs, broilers, turkeys, what poultry?
So Nebraska's done studies on pullets, layers, and broilers. And they're just completing a secondary study on layers that was basically looking to confirm some of the positive results that they saw in the first study and keep bringing that along. So we're extremely excited to see those get published. We're hoping that it happens very soon because the tests are done now. but then we are actually also going into a study with Purdue University to do egg quality studies, because we believe that the nutritional value of millet is very possible to be able to transfer through the process of feeding into the
You are
agriculture
what you
today.
eat. That's true with poultry or chicken and egg. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
So we're really excited about our support in that area as well. And then, a third space that we put some energy behind is getting millet recognized more like other grain crops in the federal crop insurance program. Right
Yeah.
now, it doesn't have the ability to be looked at as a revenue-based product. It's strictly a guaranteed yield product, and frankly doesn't fit most growers' needs very well. And so we've been able to do some work to start bringing millet into the revenue-based models for crop insurance. That's ongoing. It hasn't been completed yet, but we're excited about it.
Isn't that also part of your effort, or ties in with some of your effort to get geographically more diverse? Proso in particular has been pushed out over the last 30 years, pushed out of the Corn Belt, pushed out of the Central Plains into the marginal areas. And some of the things that I knew that you were working on is actually brought it back into the wheat belt, bordering on the edge of the corn and soybean belt.
Yeah. I think there's long-term opportunities for that, which is maybe something I'd like to kind of wrap up with, is just talking about what I see as the future of the world of millet here in the US.
And North America, because
Yeah.
there are some efforts in Canada and Alaska. So,
In fact, I talked with a guy who wants to plant millet in Ontario next spring, and we're trying to figure that out. But I talked with him this morning. But then the third way is to actually also be supporting the food industry and trying to be, stay alongside it and aware of what's going on. Breeding, for things like end use specifics is not very easy. And so I think we have to get really clear pictures of what it is we're looking for, so that breeding programs can be aligned as best as possible toward those end goals. But for sure, anything that supports the efforts that will increase the demand for millet are things that we're going to be supportive of. And that's very self-serving, to be honest. I mean, we sell millet seed, and that's what we do for a business model.
I'm going to break in here, because you may say it's self-serving, but you are doing a service to the whole industry, not only to the millet farmers out there that need a crop in their rotation, in a dry land, very, very drought tolerant crop into the rotation. And that means that there are areas in Nebraska and Iowa and Minnesota and Dakotas and Texas and other places that Washington, Oregon, Idaho, that this could fit in. So you're serving, yes, you're with a company. You're not a university, but even universities are very focused on what they do specifically for their geography. So I give Dryland Genetics and yourself in particular, and your breeders, lots of credit what you're doing for the business.
Yeah, I agree for sure.
I diverted, Craig. I'm sorry to interrupt that much, but boy, please tell where you think it's going in the future, and how it's going to tie in, and what are some of the things that are blocking. You mentioned crop insurance, so let's go on with that line.
Sure. So in the fall of 2021, when I joined Dryland Genetics, it really, I would say it happened in a twofold response to our founder and CEO, Pat Schnabel, and then one of our original primary investors, kind of sharing with me the vision of why they were excited about their work here at Dryland Genetics, and the investor, why he was excited to have invested in a startup company like that. And it really came down to the idea that, water efficiency and water scarcity are going to continue to be issues that we deal with in the space of growing food and agriculture in general. They're not going to get better in the long run. They're going to be more challenging. And so to me, that resonated with me. Here's a water efficient crop that wasn't getting any attention. And if we could bring crop improvement attention to that was an exciting effort. Then you think of just, what it means to be, to be working with a crop that has that much nutritional value, whether it's feed or food, that really is an important crop to focus on. So when we took a look at those things, we made some bold statements early on that we saw the proso millet market going from 500,000 acres to 5 million acres. And I can tell you in the fall of 21, when I started telling millet growers in the high plains that that's kind of the vision we had, I got some pretty interesting looks and some pretty interesting reactions, to be honest. Most people had looked at millet as it had been used for the last 20, 25 years and really didn't see any possible new markets or change that would make it so much more dynamic than it had been. But they're starting to see them. As food companies are starting to, promote millets, people are starting to say, okay, tell me more about what this is. I've got a small group of friends, family, and whatever that I've been introducing millet to for the last couple of years. And I can tell you, none of them had tried it before we started having those conversations. And most of them enjoy it now one way or another that we've learned how to produce, prepare it.
Yeah.
Again, I see millet, and especially proso millet, gaining traction in North America just because of the dynamics of what it brings to the market, both as a commodity grain crop to be grown and as an end product to be utilized for the feed, fuel, and food markets.
Well, you bring up an interesting thing that dovetails into what Joni spoke about earlier, and that is the regenerative efforts out in the, I'll call it the eastern side of the Pacific Northwest, where they've used fallow consistently. Wheat fallow is a primary rotation. And
100%.
back in the 80s, I worked with proso millet, bringing that into a rotation into the Dakotas. The other thing is, Don, you talk about geographic diversity and uses. For example, in Wichita, Kansas, they pull off wheat, the first week of winter wheat, the first week of June, a lot of it, and they could easily follow with a double crop millet going back to wheat or say corn or something like that the following year. And so they could easily double crop millet, and they get twice as much rain, more than twice as much rain as they do in Northeast Colorado. And July, August are heavy rainfall months. So I see a double crop market. I see you moving geographically north. You're certainly moving west, that places where we haven't had it. And once we do that with the efforts, Joni, you're doing, and Don's doing, and Craig is doing, more and more people are being exposed to the potential of not only proso millet as a whole, rice or proso millet, but putting the flour and the byproducts in maybe small 10% of millet into a flour mix for a gluten-free with sorghum and some others. So
yeah, or even with wheat for like more regenerative rotational flours. Like we have a pasta project that we're applying for a grant to commercialize right now. And
really, yeah, tell us about it.
it would be Northwest grown. We're focusing on a Washington value chain for this and Idaho. So we would have one that was totally Washington, one that's totally Idaho, but it would be a Durham wheat blended with sorghum flour, proso millet flour, and a small percentage of a garbanzo.
So is this for a noodle?
A noodle, yeah,
okay.
like a penne pasta or like a rotini. And so we like rotini because it's kind of fun because it's rotations. But that's nerdy. I don't think anyone else is going to care about that. But yeah, it's actually really fun because there's a great pasta partner regionally that's really excited about this. And they're excited to have a value chain partner that can bring high quality, diverse crops that have been floured to the specifications needed to meet the demands of pasta. For example, there's a lot of people that would like to make pastas with like different millet flours in it, but they're not able to get like the specifications that they really need to meet the requirements of their manufacturing, so pasta making is very specific. So with this, having this facility in Montana, that opens up the ability for us to mill the sorghum and millet and garbanzo bean to the granulation needs for pasta making. So, and we'd really like to put that into like campuses and school lunch programs and whatnot, so that there's like a kind of a farm to school story there.
Perfect. And that ties in, I think, with the the breeding and the genetic work that Craig is doing, because he has the labs. There's
Yeah,
the breeders have to be testing what the product delivers before they even put it in. So if you're
100%.
if
Yeah.
you're looking at
And we don't even
and I'll
know.
just you don't
Yeah, we
know.
don't even know. Like it's like brand new kind of stuff. Like what
Well,
if we use waxy proso rather than
there you
not
go. That's where I was going. Even if
My
just
guess
on
is it's gonna
waxy,
be
you know it
huge.
works for food, but how?
Yeah.
So, all right, Craig, you want to dovetail into what Joni said and how you can tie into that, your organization?
Yeah, like I mentioned when I was talking about the breeding effort, is it really requires just a clear understanding of what that end use market is looking for.
Okay.
But then markets have to appreciate that genetic uh, advancement and change is still a slow moving vehicle in the world of agriculture. I mean, from start to finish, a new line at Dryland Genetics is going to be in year 7 before it really would reach the market as
Isn't that is it any different than corn? I mean, they've
no,
speeded
for
it up a
sure
little
not,
bit.
actually. And we're actually rapid cycling the front end of the process. So we're bringing new varieties faster because of some of the unique work we've been able to do on how do you get to a back cross 5 from an F1 cross in one winter cycle. So every year we come out to our spring nursery, we've got a couple thousand new lines that we're evaluating. But from that point to testing, you're still looking at 5 to 6 years additional time, so
And
that
just to get the quantities of seed.
yeah, just
for grain.
to know what you have
Yeah.
and what you're looking at. And so that's why there has to be a closer collaboration, I think, between the two groups when you're actually trying to get to end use specific. One of the things that I'm excited about is our germplasm. The whole portfolio is just so deep and so wide that we can actually screen that to get a head start on
Screening, meaning your
some of these end use markets.
genetic testing. Is that what you mean by screening?
Yeah, well, for example, if we're looking for whether it's on the agronomic side, shatter resistance, or whether it's on the food side, easy dehulling or say nutritional profile, we can screen everything we have that's already sitting there for us, but not being commercially developed today because it just, for one reason or other, wasn't fitting the commercial side. But it's still sitting in our library of germplasm. We can pull that out if it's got the right characteristics, and then go to work very, very quickly to bring it into commercialization in a competitive germplasm background.
Well, with that, I'm just curious. I've done some work in other countries. Are you able to track down what varieties are used in which countries for food? For example, Mongolia or any place across Asia, India, for example, where and what specific millets they are using for food products, what food products, and why they're using that type of variety.
Yeah, so a lot of that, especially India, Asia, is pearl millet.
It is,
But
and
like if you go to
several others, yes.
Yeah, if you go to Europe, a lot of that food based millet is actually proso, and it could be coming from the U.S. or from Ukraine.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's still agronomically adapted varieties are being planted geographically around the world without regard to any what I would call true genetic differences in the profile of the varieties themselves. There's so little breeding work actually being done in millets that it's still
Any
just
place in
looking
the
at
world.
geographic performance of yield and agronomics. That's what's driving what's being used.
And even more specifically, proso millet. I mean, you take millets in general, there is work being done on pearl like all over, but the genetic work like Dryland is doing on proso specifically is very, very limited around the world.
Yeah. Imagine that what can come from that. I mean, that's what's so exciting with these crops that have been minimally explored using more modern, breeding techniques is like the world's your oyster when it comes to really neat things to develop and discover.
Well, that's why these type of broadcasts that we're recording and making available on hits that I've received on last month's, it comes from all over the world. And so people are picking up on tips that they can come to you, or you can go to them and offer maybe some of the things that you're working on and why. And if somebody needs a food product in Massachusetts, Joni may run across something that Craig has in his pipeline that maybe is already released as a variety that we can get growers in Ontario or in Pennsylvania or other places. We got 48 states, according to USDA, 48 states producing millet. People find that hard to believe, but that's their own data, and just under 1 million acres in 48 states. Some of it's grain, a lot of it is feed. But proso in particular ranges from 21 to about 26 states every year. And so we are geographically diverse, just because USDA only records 3 states.
And Gary, we're pretty excited about the fact that we're adding Alaska to that mix.
There you go. Tell us about that.
Cool.
Well, through your connection, Gary, with the researchers up in Alaska, you know, they had gotten some seed late from you last year and weren't able to get it into test in any way, just due to the timing of everything. But I have now reached out to them, and we're going to send them a panel of 9 varieties of some different maturities, really just to understand that day length and that unique environment as to whether or not millet can be a crop. I'm actually pretty excited to see what we get and to find out if it's early, if it's mid, if it's late, that looks better or does better. But we'll be testing, like I said, 9 of our new elite varieties, just segregated out by maturity differences to see how they do up there.
Well, Alaska is unique, and I got a nephew living in North Pole, which is just outside of Fairbanks, and the research on this millet is going to occur in that geography. And so what I found unique about this, and why I'm excited to have communication up there, is that it is actually lower elevation than where millet is produced in Sully, central South Dakota. And so you don't deal with the elevation restrictions. You really are dealing with photo length, period. So the elevation is not an issue, because we are breeding in the high plains of Nebraska, Colorado, and raising, that's where the primary millet's raised. And so it's high elevations. But I also worked in Mongolia, high elevation valleys, 4,000 plus feet, where our varieties were the top 3 of the 3 I sent. They were the top 3 compared to Russian and Mongolian varieties, decades ago. So millet, proso in particular, has ability to adjust for photo periods. And that's the key up there. They have a very short growing season, but lots and lots of sun. And so I think it's going to tell you things about your variety that you wouldn't necessarily pick up in your continental breeding program.
And there's more heat units up there than people think too. I lived in Fairbanks for a while, and
did you really?
Yeah, north of Fairbanks actually, and
on the Arctic Circle. That's just south of the Arctic, just south of the Arctic Circle.
I was just outside of town, not too far, but it was on the north side, and it was shockingly hot in the summer in Fairbanks. And they have a really interesting farming community there. And in fact, the Fairbanks Farmers Market is a thriving, incredible community, and they grow fantastic, huge produce there. But then there's the Matsu Valley too, and things that are a little further south towards Anchorage. And they just have these incredibly warm but concentrated summers. They're short summers, but they're warm, and they have incredible photo periods. So I think there's a whole neat opportunity there. And that's one of the things that's nerve-wracking living in Alaska, is you're so dependent on imported staples. I mean, there's tons of salmon, there's tons of fish, tons of moose, but other than blueberries, and other than that, everything else is imported in. So having that grain sovereignty would be cool.
They do have grain growing, but it was primarily for forage. And not that we're looking at developing a market in Alaska for millet necessarily, but we're testing Dryland Genetics, for example, is testing varieties to understand that that photoperiod sensitivity, because as you move proso, for example, that you raise in Colorado, and you put it down in Florida, which I've had people do to raise it for seed in the middle of the winter, they have enough heat to do it. But it got 4 inches tall, they couldn't harvest it because of the photoperiod shortened the plant to the point it was not usable. So there's things that you learn about moving varieties around to get better understanding of what they do. And the other thing, as far as use, the forages that they are produced in Alaska are really forages, are grains for forages. Where here we're looking at a product that could be produced in certainly under 100 days for grain.
Yeah.
I want to keep going on this line, but I want to make sure we open it up to to those that are online here. Please unmute your mic and ask questions of Craig or Joni, please.
Hey, Gary, wanted to just start with a quick backfill of information. We've been talking about proso millet, and everybody here knows what we're talking about, but anybody viewing is not clear. It's the Panicum miliaceum. It's one of a number of different species that we group under the name millets, and it just happens to be very well suited to the temperate climates coming out of China originally, but they still produce quite a bit there too. There's one, I wanted to start off with a question about something Joni mentioned and might relate also to breeding varieties. You mentioned something about bitterness in certain varieties of proso. I haven't encountered that personally. I did encounter a bitterness issue with pearl millet, different species in West Africa, where in the more humid areas, foreigners especially would say it tasted bitter, but I never really experienced that at all in the drier Sahel areas in the north. And the reasons that some researchers have suggested have to do with varieties and also harvesting methods in the more humid climates towards the Guinea coast. So I don't know what's manifesting or what's causing this to manifest in proso, whether that's something a breeding question that DLG is looking at.
Such a good question, because we don't know. I mean, that's the whole thing, Don, is like, through the years when we've gotten batches of proso millet from a ingredients vendor before we were able to have a vertically integrated supply chain, we would call up the vendor and say, hey, the quality, the baking activity, the flavor, whatever, is different than the last batch. Here's this lot. Here's the last lot. Can you help us understand? They had no idea. They didn't. There's no tracking. There's no understanding in the market, in the value chain to actually focus on these attributes. And bitterness is an attribute that is an issue, especially in adoption of larger market segments to using proso millet, because the number one thing I hear from people of, hey, we're working to develop proso millet value chains. We'd really like to work with you. If they're not, if they're going to have a negative reaction every time, 99% of the time, it's because they're like, we've tried it and it's bitter. And I'm like, okay, what is this bitterness thing? And nobody knows. Nobody knows really what it's from. So that's one of the things I'd like to get to the bottom of it, because if you can have a bitterness-free proso millet program, whether that's germplasm driven or harvest or terroir, soil ecology driven, we just don't know. And so having this vertically integrated approach is going to allow us to really get to the bottom of that and use that as a marketing attribute. And so we'll go back to some of these larger market segments and say, look, we've figured this out. We've got great proso millet. It does not have that bitterness quality. We want you to innovate with this as a primary ingredient.
And it may be a specific variety. Right?
Yep. Yeah. And we just don't, again, we just don't know.
Right.
A lot of
Can
the
you
farmers
answer
we
that?
track back to don't even know what seed they planted. They're like, I don't know. I have it in the bin. I have no idea what it is. Yeah.
That's a great point. It really, when you think about genetics by environment and the outcomes you get, most agriculture commodity crops don't really understand it that well. And if you look at proso millet, unfortunately, it's been primarily used domestically as wild bird seed.
Sure.
Yep.
And so let
me break in there. It's only been used as wild bird seed since we've been able to afford to feed wild birds, because before the 1960s, it was used as hog millet, meaning it was planted in hog pastures and used for grazing. And so, it was poultry feed and things like that. And then there became a wild bird food market, which basically they kept raising proso to feed into that. And that's the only reason that proso is being grown for the most part, the several 100,000 acres a year in the U.S.
But to just follow that, it's going to take identity preservation to ever get to a point to satisfy truly what Joni's talking about. Because until you get there, there really is no understanding by the brokers or merchandisers of, one, what is the source of the millet? I mean, today that there's just no way to even get there until we back up and start over. It's not that hard to get there eventually, but there just has to be a reason to get there. And so I see that coming in the very near future, where if there's a reason for identity preservation to satisfy an end use market, it can happen, pretty easily, to be honest.
It certainly, there's
Yeah.
lots of crops up there that can and are being identified by grower through the process all the way to the through the food chain. So yeah, that can be done, and certainly having proso grading standards, uniform standards,
So important.
meaning
Yeah.
that buyers know what they're actually buying, can make it fungible, even if it is the same variety.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big deal. All of those things are the things that keep the development of proso millet as like a recognizable, important commodity in our North American landscape. Like it holds it back, that's my understanding, after trying to drive markets for proso millet for a decade. So I am so appreciative of your work, Gary, on the millet standards grading criteria that we're so lucky to have you leading here at NAMA, and Craig, all the great work that's being done at Dryland Genetics, because those of us who are on the market side, we literally understand that we're held back until we have these things developed. Once we have them developed, we can learn a lot from quinoa. Sergio Nunez de Arco, who's an incredible thought leader and industry leader in the quinoa movement. He was a very early adopter. He's a Bolivian, and he understood and recognized that immediately with quinoa as well, is that they needed germplasm consistency and they needed processing consistency to mature the category for quinoa. And they worked on it, and it was effective. And now quinoa is available in every Walmart in America in their deli. I mean, that is remarkable when you think about it. So I think if we follow a lot of the lessons that quinoa used and learned from and laid the foundation for, we can effectively create a great market for healthier small cereal crops like proso millet in North America.
Okay, I see Susan and some other ones had joined the call. Are there questions from Susan or any others on this call?
Hi, this is Susan. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Hi,
Sorry.
Susan.
Hi. I've just been paying attention. I'm work at the Colorado Department of Agriculture and in a new climate smart program. So I connected with Joni, and in general, we're quite interested in millets, but yeah, are trying to understand better what's happening. And Craig, you've been on my list to try to get in touch with. So yeah, I'm just madly taking notes, and we are considering doing pilot programs. I think I've been working with a CSU extension agent who did tests for low water crops in our San Luis Valley, which is having wells be decommissioned next year. So
we participated in that program.
Yeah, you did. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So apparently beans came out #1 for market potential, but I think millet, she said, definitely has potential, but it would need like a little more funding to get it started. And yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, there are.
And so, Susan, are you working on any of the food uses, the end uses of millet, or strictly from the production end?
Well, I think we would take what we can get. Yeah, my background is in the food, natural products, and organics industry. So, and I'm working on regenerative. I mean, climate smart, I think, is used sort of interchangeably with regenerative at this point. And yeah, the department, our conservation division, got a climate smart commodities grant to support producers to transition. So we have, about 400 plus farmers that we're in close contact with now, who are farming regeneratively. And so there's a lot of interest and potential in Colorado, I would say. And yeah, but of course we have water issues, and we need to make sure that we're just sharing information so that the producers can make their own decisions. But yeah,
Susan, that is huge, because any one year, and a lot of research that I've done, like in Turkey and other places, we do 3 or 4 years of research before we publish. And sometimes you see millet, proso, for example, or dry beans or something like that, 1 or 2 years of study. Well, depending on the price of the commodity that year and the growing season that year, it might not necessarily equate to what is overall the best water rotational use. So anyway, I really appreciate you bringing those points up. Do we have any other questions coming in?
Yeah, I'm my name's Brad Haynes. I've met Jody and Leadership Sorghum about a year and a half ago down in Lubbock, and now on the Colorado Sorghum Board as a member of that board.
Yeah,
and I've talked with Susan as well different times. But as a producer, millet's in my rotation, proso's in my rotation every year. I actually have interest in double cropping out in Northeast Colorado where I farm. I planted camelina last year, and then I tried to double crop. When I fertilized the camelina, I broadcast 40 pounds of millet into the camelina because I knew it wouldn't germinate till it got warmer. And so I was going to strip her head the camelina off and let that grow through. What I learned in that process was I had too much residue and didn't have seed to soil, so I didn't get the millet to come up. Where it was bare, it actually did. And so I was encouraged by that.
Did it mature?
My question would be, as it relates to the possibility of double cropping after, in that Northeast Colorado area, because I agree. I mean, I think around Wichita, and I live in Hays, Kansas, as reference, but I farm in Northeast Colorado. My question would be, from a logistics standpoint, I think you could double crop a ton of millet and get production down into Kansas real easy, especially as you go further east to here, down in Salina and further east. They're double cropping short season beans and things of that nature after wheat harvest.
Yeah, soybeans certainly. Junction City, Manhattan. Yeah,
but there's no place no elevators take it, no people handle it or deal with it, and if they do decide to raise it, they got to truck it Lord knows how far to get somewhere.
Well, I think that's why Craig is working on some not only poultry in parts of the area, but also some ethanol plants. Craig, you want to address that?
Sure. Thanks for your comments, Brad. But one of the ethanol plants I started working with, it just happens to be out in Oakley, Kansas, Western Plains. And the reason that it's happening is just because Derek is extremely interested in finding a third feedstock for their plant. They use corn and milo interchangeable today, and they've actually optimized their facility to do that. We did a test run with millet already last year, and it was extremely successful. And now we're just trying to make sure that we're set up on the pathways process so that they can get a RIN for the gallons of millet ethanol produced. And that's actually tracking really well. But to your point, that's one of the things that has kept millet kind of in the high plains, concentrated north, the Northeast Colorado, Western Nebraska, is because there is a accumulation and a market structure for it there. You get outside of that and there's nothing, and it makes millet really difficult to even consider. And I think that's where just the overall expansion of millet as a end use commodity can help everybody in that process.
Thank you very much. We're running towards the end of our scheduled hour, and I know there's some commitments out there. But one thing that was put in the notes, I don't know if you've seen it, but anybody that's on this call or know of people in the industry, whether they're directly working with proso or any millets, we work with all millets in North America. So please maybe give us your email list or subscribe to the collaboration list, and you'll get regular updates from us. And these types of programs will be continued throughout the year and be available. So anything to wrap up, Joni and Craig?
We're going to have another webinar next month. We're bringing back our monthly webinar push like we had during UN Year of Millets. And we'll be recording them all. And I think eventually we're going to create a YouTube station, right? And so that way we can share these after the fact, and we don't have to put so much pressure on people to try to join us when they have conflicting meetings, etc. So that way we can share these far and wide. So let us know if you have any topics you're interested in, folks who are on the call.
Absolutely. And Craig?
No, I'd just like to say, it's a pleasure to join this group and actually any group where I get to talk about millet and what, why we're excited about it. But again, I'm always happy to engage with anybody if they want to just talk about different ideas or whatever it is in the space of millet. But it's always a pleasure. And so thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, thanks. That's Craig Anderson with Dryland Genetics and Joni Kindwall-Moore with Snacktivist. So thank you very much.
And then Brad, reach out to me because I actually have an idea for you for your region. Somebody I know who's working with millet there. So yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. I'll do it.
Cool. All right. Thanks,
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.